So I'm going to minimize this. You all can see my screen okay, right?
Yes, I can see it.
Good, thank you. So
we can see you.
Great. I'm going to minimize all the panels in here. I try to see why this slide is not doing anything. So just a second here because the PowerPoint is not responding in here. It's kind of weird. Maybe I should copy it from the website under here. So I'm going to copy the file of this one.
Hello, this is John Amano of MathSci.
Hey, John, thanks for joining. And I try to get the PowerPoint working on the side in here.
I have Steve O'Neill with me also.
Okay, thank you.
It's better. We're muted.
Okay. So, like I mentioned, this is about annual factoring. So today, basically, me, Ben Chen, and BJ will be demo you the features. So basically, I want to give you some of the brief introduction about the terminology that we use in our system. So we are on the same page. And when we talk about class distribution factor, seasonal class, so we all know what it means. So that's why I want to go over the terminology first. And then BJ will carry on to show you in the live system about how to do the seasonal factor clustering, how to do axial factor clustering, and then we will keep about 10 to 15 minutes for you to ask any questions and then give us some feedback if you have. So that's the plan. So let's look at the basic terminology. So you all know our TCDS can handle these main tasks, from pulling the data from a count station to process raw data file, QC it, and then allow you to generate analytics and reports. And then at the end of the year, you can develop factors and compute statistics. And then every month, you can submit the TMAS. And also, at the end of the year, you can do the HPMS traffic statistic reporting. So today, we're going to really focus on the factoring piece, show you how you can use the new interface to develop each type of factor. So this is the overall traffic data processing flow. So that's why I specifically frame these two boxes together, because when you talk about annual factoring, you always try to group a set of permanent count stations together if they have a similar traffic pattern. And then for that group, then you can calculate seasonal factor, axial factor, growth factor. So that's why today's webinar is really about this interface in here. And also, I want to point out that although I did send you the user guide for the annual year-end processing, I also want to point out that anytime if you want to get a copy from your system, you can always go to this Live Preserver icon here. It's called Support. When you click on Support, it will land you onto the MS2 Zendesk. And then on the Zendesk, we have a knowledge base, which we publish a lot of useful documents there. So the year-end processing document will be right here, this highlighted line, right? So when you click on it, you will download a 5 megabyte PDF file, which is contain a lot of content BJ is going to cover. So that's the user guide. So now let's review the terminology we're using in here, right? Basically, TCDS has 6 major factors. Let's go over each one of them. So we have a seasonal factor. What it does is that it tries to adjust any raw counts to the AADT. So that's why it handle to consider the signal traffic patterns for all vehicles. So keep in mind that's for all vehicles. One of the example value will be say 0.865 on Monday in August. That means for this location on Monday in August, you tend to have a high volumes. So when you capture that daily volume, you need to discount it by almost like a 13.5% to get to the AADT. So that's what it means, right? So the value could be ranging from 0.8 to 1.2, for example. So that's signal factors. And then we also have an axial factor. It really deal with the number of axles for each type of vehicle. For example, a passenger car, you have 2 axles. Class 9 vehicle, you have 5 axles. So if you from one location to another, you have a different mixture of type of vehicles. So that's what the axial factor is about. We try to figure out if you just collect axle hits, then the total number of axle hits divided by 2 is the virtual number of vehicles. But in reality, class 9 vehicle got 5 axles, so you need to discount that volume. So that's why you could discount it by 21% in order to get the number of volumes. So that's what the axial factor is about. We also have a growth factor. That means if you do not count that location every year, but you do need AADT for every year. So for all those locations you have no actual count, you can use the growth factor to project it up to the current year. For example, if it's a 0.02 for 2017, that means the AADT change from 2016 to 17 is about 2%. So these are all decimal format in here. So the next factor is about class distribution. So basically try to calculate what's the average ratio for each type of vehicle versus the AADT. So when we are saying 0.93 for class 9, that means for this location, for the AADT, 9.3% of the vehicle are class 9. And then you could have 60% of the vehicle are passenger car, maybe 4% of the vehicle, or maybe 2% of the vehicle are motorcycle, right? So basically, that's what the class distribution factor is about. And then next factor is the signal class. We talk about signal factor in the first line in here. This one is a little bit more advanced because the signal pattern may be different for the passenger car versus the class 9 vehicle. So that's what this class factor is about. So what it's saying is that you have 0.818 factor value for class 9 on Monday in August. That means you tend to have a higher volume of class 9 vehicle on Monday in August. So that's why when you count in that class 9 vehicle, you need to discount it by like a 19%. So that's what it means. And then the last factor we have called a win E-cell because you may want to know the E-cell value for all count locations throughout the state. So what our system can do is we can find out what's the average E-cell for each type of vehicle for this area. So for example, you could have 1.251 E-cell for class 9 vehicle. That way, if I know how many class 9 vehicle, then I can estimate the E-cell value for this location. So these are the terminology we use in our system, and BJ will go into show you the interface for a couple of popular factors like signal and axial, but the other factors, they would have an identical interface. So let me talk about the clustering analysis a little bit, right? So this is an example of a bunch of permanent count stations throughout the whole year in 2014. So when you plot the monthly of factor, you can see that they all jump all over the place. They don't exhibit the similar pattern, right? For the clustering analysis, you want to filter out any station that do not exhibit the same pattern for the group. So the idea is you want to remove this line, and all these outliers from your permanent count station group. So your goal is to go into get the bundle lines like this. So every station exhibits similar patterns. So after you clear out all the abnormal stations, now you have a group of stations that you can compute average seasonal factors. So that's the goal for the clustering analysis. And then another example is for the axial factor cluster analysis. So you have a group of stations that have classification counts. Then you look at all of them. Most of them exhibit similar patterns. That means you have a high percentage of passenger cars, and then you have a high percentage of Class 9 vehicle among the trucks. But there's one station has very high Class 9 vehicle. That means it's not in the same group, so you should remove this station out of it. So your goal is that you want to remove that outlier so you have a bundle of a curve like this. So based on these lines, you can come up with axial factors. So let's show you what the cluster analysis is about. So now I'm going to let BJ pick up from here to show you in the live system how to do the cluster analysis for seasonal and axial factors.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to get started here, and I'm actually going to jump into a real system. I set up some data on text.test to demonstrate this with. Okay, so I've logged into text.test, and I'm going to do a search for some stations that I set up to belong to my test factor groups, so that I can show you what it looks like when you're looking at stations that have these factor groups assigned to them. Can't find district. Right here. So I'm finding all the stations in Dallas that are functional class 1, and these are the stations that I assigned to my test factor group. So people who are familiar with the system and have done year-end processing the last few years, we've recently added clustering interfaces to the class distribution and other things like that. And when we added those new types of groups, we added the notion of being able to make a station belong to a certain group in a certain year. So the core of the system originally had seasonal factors and axial factors, but they were in an old table structure. And in that old table structure, you couldn't associate a station with a certain year. And if you ever wanted to change which group that a station belonged to in a certain year, you had to completely remove its assignment to that group. So what we wanted to do in the change that we made recently to the system, this upgrade, brings seasonal and axial in line with all of the newer factor types that we've added to the system to allow you to do this same notion of removing certain stations from a group for a particular year. And this demonstrates it here where you can expand down on the seasonal factor group that this station belongs to this group in these 2 different years. And it can belong in 10 years. So you've got a whole history of which group it belonged to in which year. And in certain years, you could assign it to a different group, and it would show you here. This also replaces the notion of seasonal factor master year and axial factor master year. So our clients who are used to doing year-end processing in the last few years might be familiar with that attribute. So when you were assigning stations to a perm station, you would either add or remove things from the master year to determine whether or not that perm station contributed its factors to the group. That has been rolled into the new clustering interface that I'm about to show you. So there is no longer a seasonal factor master year or axial factor master year. We've removed that concept. So in order to show you the new interfaces, I'm going to go to the admin page. On the admin page, if we scroll down, under Manage Lists is where you can see your actual groups, and the interfaces for seasonal factor and axial factor have been updated to match the other new factor types as well. So this interface should look familiar to anybody who has used the new class distribution factors or things like that in the last few years. You can take a look at any of the groups and view them in a grid, and so you've got your grid of factors here. And I can show you what this will look like once we get real factors computed. But you've got your groups of all your different types, and then down in annual processing tools, we now have seasonal factor clustering and axial factor clustering, our two new steps that are available in the year-end processing. I'm going to go into seasonal factor clustering. For text.test, I only have data back in 2013, so I'm going to choose the year 2013 and my 01 SC test group. So when you choose a year in a group, it goes out and looks at all of the permanent count stations that are assigned to that group and then displays a pattern for you. The chart that we're looking at is showing us the months across here, but we can change this drop down to show day of week instead. So if you wanted to look at it by day of week pattern versus month pattern, you can change that with this drop down. We're also currently looking at the factors as they're computed through the months, but you could look at raw volumes if you wanted to instead as well. So there's other buttons here that change what the graph shows to look at it in different ways. Z-scores are the standard deviations. So this is how many standard deviations off of the average that any of these given stations are. So there's a lot of different ways to visualize the data here. Under selection options, though, is really where your key tools are going to be to choose which stations you want to belong to the group or not for processing these factors. This checkbox that says gray outline on exclude, you can see here that it's already excluding some of these outliers for us, and that's with our starting defaults. I'll explain that in a little bit. But gray outline on exclude means that you still get to see them as part of the graph. If I were to turn that off, they don't even show up on the graph at all. Validation removal, this is sort of a check that you can do on your data to make sure that you have enough days of data to contribute to the seasonal factors. This is similar to the options that were available in previous years for seasonal factors and axial factors. You could choose to only include stations that had data for 2 of each day of week for a certain number of months, for example. So for example, I could choose 2 and say 8 here. And when I do that, it updates the graph, and it will now exclude any station, any permanent count station, that doesn't have at least 2 days of data in 8 months. And so that's a way to sort of remove some of the stations that have very low representation. Below that is the outlier removal. The default value, the recommended value, is 3.5 standard deviations. So if something is more than 3.5 standard deviations off of the average, then it's going to get excluded. You can change this and choose it to either look at fewer standard deviations, and you can see as I slide this bar, it's removing more and more things that are deviating from the average. And then there's also an option here for how many outliers it needs. So there's 12 months available here. Well, maybe only 1 month was an outlier and the rest of the months meet the average. Then it wouldn't remove it currently because it needs 3 outliers to be removed right now. So there's a lot of different options here on choosing which stations to exclude. But you can also do this completely manually as well. So if you click on any given line, you can either select it or deselect it. So it grays out if it's going to not be included in your seasonal factor, or it becomes colored if you're actually going to include it in your seasonal factor. So once you get your graph to look the way that you want, and you've got your stations chosen that you want to include in computing your seasonal factors for this particular group, you can click Process at the bottom. So it's now crunching all of the data for the permutations that I have selected, and now it is going to return to me all of those factors that it came up with. So we've got each of the different days of the week and all the different months of the year. For each day of the week, you can choose and well, for each individual value, actually, you can choose whether to use this year's computed value or last year's value. So if you wanted to just pull forward last year's value into the current year, you can choose to use last year's value. Or you can enter your own numbers, you can choose your own manual numbers, and you can individually edit individual ones. So if there's a certain one that looks wrong or you don't like it, you can change its value as well. Once you get all of the different days of the week and months values set the way that you want, you hit submit, and it gives you a warning that says that it is going to insert these factors into the table, and when new factors are inserted into the table for the year that you're choosing, for the group that you're choosing, any existing AADTs that are on short count stations that belong to that group in that year would be deleted. So if you're messing with your factors, you always have to keep in mind that your preliminary AADTs that you've computed so far are going to be deleted, and this is now going to overnight recompute your short count AADTs using these new factors. So it's now inserting these records into the table and clearing out old AADTs. And then when this is done, I can show what that looks like in the main interface. One other thing I want to mention about this graph here, a lot of times you can get a lot of lines on here and it can look a bit messy. There is a feature on here that you can zoom into a certain area to look at it in more detail. So you can use your mouse wheel. Your mouse wheel can scroll into the graph, and that'll allow you to pick a particular line easier or look at the values a bit easier. So the scroll wheel can zoom in and out on the graph. So if I go back out and go into seasonal factors, I computed 01 FC test group for 2013. If I hit view here, now I've got values. This interface here shows you the individual values paged, which locations belong to that group, and then you can go into the 12x7 grid editor to see the full grid of values, export this out to Excel, or individually edit any of these values. So that covers seasonal factors. Axial factors work fairly similarly. I'm going to go into the axial factor clustering interface. Again, I'm going to go to 2013, choose my group, and now it's looking at all of the class data on stations that belong to this group, and it's analyzing how many axles are on all of the different classifications of vehicles on stations that belong to this factor group. Similarly, there's different ways to look at the data. This is looking at the factors. You could look at the raw volumes of each of the different classes. So this station here has a lot of passenger vehicles while the others don't. Again, you can zoom in. So if I wanted to look at this area down here in a little more detail, I can zoom in down to this little section. If I switch back over to factors, when it's on factors, as a factor, that red line doesn't actually look like much of an outlier. It's fairly similar to the rest of them, unless it's this one. I think it's that one. Yeah. So that one had no trucks in it, so you might want to remove it. But you can use the same options over here for validation to see how many days of week it has for data, keeping in mind that this day of week and month data that's required for validation on this, for axial factors in particular, if you're using short count stations to compute your axial factors, then using that type of validation is not going to work because none of the short count stations are going to have multiple days of week for multiple months. But if you're only using perm count station data for your axial factors, then you could use this to remove some stations that are low on data and don't have a good representation. So you can use your outlier removal to remove your outliers, and then once you've got your bundle of factors that you want, you can click process. Now when you're processing axial factors, you got to choose whether you want to process it by day, by month, or by year. And that is, do you want different factors for every day of the week, or different factors just for the months, or just a single factor for the entire year? And that's going to depend on the quality of your data, how much perm station data you've got that's got classification data in this particular group. So if you're only using short count data, you might not have enough different factors in all the different months of the year to do factors by year, and you would just have to process it by year. I believe the stations that I'm using are perm stations, so I'm going to choose day. So it's going out and grabbing all of the classification data on these stations and computing the axial factors. And now when it returns, it gives us a similar form to what the seasonal factor one was. You've got all the different months of the year, the different days of the week, and you can use this year's values or last year's values or edit them. And if I cancel this and reprocess it by month, then on this one you can see that the months have different values, but each day of the week has the same value. So you've got different factors by month, but not by day of week. The factors, though, are still stored in our table in a full grid like this, so you do have to submit the full set to complete the group and get the factors into our table. So we'll store all these individual values. It's just that when they're computed, they're computed in this way. One other thing I wanted to mention, up under selection options up here, there is station type. So you can choose to look at all the stations, or just permanent count stations, or just short count stations. So if you know for a particular group or for your whole agency that you only use permanent count stations, and you want to make sure that no short count stations are included, then you could choose permanent, and then it would update your grid to only look at permanent count stations. So I'm going to actually just process this really quick so we can look at the final result. Okay, so I choose 2013. I want the value that it computed, and you can see here that the value is the same for the entire year, because I chose to do it by year. And I hit submit. It warns you, if you're changing factors, you're going to delete AADTs on all the stations in this group for this year. And I hit OK on that, and it's inserting the values into the table and deleting the AADTs, and then they'll get recomputed overnight tonight. The other thing that I forgot to mention on the seasonal factors actually is there's a progress bar up here. So if you've got, say, 10 groups, as you process each one of these, it will mark it off as complete. So this one right here has a check mark next to it. It is marked off as complete. And so you can work your way through the groups one by one, completing them until you get to 100% completion for all of your factor groups, and then you know that you're done processing that type of factor. If you ever need to unprocess something, you can click the Unprocess button, and it will then unlock it and allow you to make changes to it and reprocess it. We also have the ability to do a process all. If you do process all, it's going to work the way that it used to work. So if I actually click process all, I'll show you the page. It looks similar to the way that it used to look previously, and all you do is choose the fidelity of your factors, whether or not you want to use perm stations or not, how many pieces of information needs to be valid, and then calculate axial factors, and it will do it for all groups. So if you have hundreds of axial factor groups and you don't want to process them one by one, then you could use this, but it won't allow you to use that clustering interface where you get to pick and choose which stations contribute to your factors. So you do have options as to which way you want to do it. We'll go take a look at the axial factors. So the axial factor interface, again, looks very similar. I've got my O1 SC test group for 2013, and I've got the factor values in here, the locations that belong to the group, and my grid editor. So that covers seasonal and axial factors. We also added a clustering interface to growth factors. So the growth factors have always looked like the new interface. So under growth factors, when you're looking at the groups and the years, and you're assigning stations to groups, this new interface also has a notion of what to show you. If you've got groups that are really old, it won't show them to you anymore. So it tries to clean up the interface and only show you recent stuff. So this display set of options that are available here allows you to look at older years of groups if they haven't been used in the last so many years. So it defaults to only showing you groups that have been used in the last 3 years. I've only got 2013 data in here, so I had to change this drop down to say, show me stuff that's been used in the last 7 years, and then it actually showed these groups to me. So if you notice that your groups are missing, or you want to see some of your older groups that you wonder where they are, you might want to take a look at these display values to see those. So the growth factor clustering is available down here in the year-end processing, and it also looks the same and functions the same as the other two types as well. I think I have a lot of stations in this group, so. So what this does is it tries to show a history of, right now I'm looking at the factors, and you can see here, this is the actual factor that it would compute for each one of these permanent count stations. If I hit volume, we can get a little bit of a history here where it shows how much it's growing. So you can, if you had a multi-year history on your stations, you could actually see the multi-year history of that graph and see whether the volumes are going up, whether they're going down, whether they're traveling in the same pattern as to the rest of the stations in that group. So this clustering interface is really useful for finding stations that have similar patterns, but you might need to switch between volume and factors to get the full picture of what you're looking at. But similarly, you can include or exclude certain stations that you don't want to include, and then process the group as well. That pretty much covers everything that I was going to cover. So at this point, we're going to open it up to any questions that anybody has from the audience.
So question from anybody? So
This is Ted Little. I was wondering, can we get a test environment?
You want like a whole test environment?
What do they? How are you
Well,
applying factors without
Becky is wondering how you're doing it there for Texas for those factors.
impacting the data?
Oh, for the demo, we just copy the data from the Texas system. But for you can do your calculation on your own system without committing to it, right? We just show you that you can compute all the factor value review on the screen. You don't have to submit it. If you don't submit it, nothing will be saved into the system.
Correct. We want to submit it though. We want to look at the impacts of things, but
Right.
We were
So
interested
you
in
can
seeing
submit
what
it.
it would ultimately to our VMT, you know, when we messed with factors. And so I don't think we're looking at a complete database, but a couple of years so that we can play with the factors.
I mean, you can always redo your year-end processing as many times as you want. So there's no harm in doing it on your live site against all of your data, and just compute your AATs, see what your values come out to, save a copy of those, and then recompute them a different way.
And also keep in mind, all the methodology we described has not changed. There's still the TMG ASTO methodology. It's just the interface is more user-friendly. It's easier for you to include or exclude station. So what we show you here, really the interface change. There is no methodology change. The algorithm.
Yeah, we understand that, Ben. We're more looking at that as we're kind of looking at changing the way we're developing factors, like looking at regional factors and this and that. Is why we were asking that question.
Yeah, and also we do have an option for DOT to create a separate instance, mirroring all the data, but there's additional cost for that. So because we have to copy all the data into a different instance, so you can go in and do all sort of analysis. Because that takes effort for us to copy the data over and maintain that instance. So there's additional cost for that. So if any DOT want to go that route, we can talk in private. So
Yeah, and
Okay, we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
Right.
that's, did you, one of the things, and I could be wrong on this, but can sites belong to more than one group? A permanent site?
I believe so, right? I think,
They couldn't before,
I
is
don't
that
think
right?
they can.
yeah, I think the
perm
perm site,
sites can. If perm sites can belong to more than one group if they're contributing factors to the factors. It's when you are using the factors that you can't belong to more than one group, because then it wouldn't know which factor to use.
they'll be only for the shortcut stations.
Right,
For
right,
seasonal
but so
flight.
I could assign a site to, say, urban minor arterial as well as urban collector? A permanent
A
site?
permanent, like if you want to include that station in the factor value, then it can be done.
Okay.
Nice.
Ben and BJ, I have a follow-up question on that. This is Laura at Texas. So in the clustering interface, you showed that you could exclude a permanent station from the group that's used to develop the factor. So if a permanent station resides in two groups as a station that's contributing, temporal data for the seasonal factor, if it participates in the group as contributing data, but when you go through the clustering interface, you exclude it from that set, but it participates in a separate group, and you go through the clustering interface, and then you include it as contributing to that set, will that still function appropriately when you're, as a permanent station, participating in two groups?
Yeah.
Yes, that should work fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hey, BJ, this is Peter in Montana. I have a quick question for you, and it's, would you ever consider putting out a graph or a visual that shows the monthly day of the week change? And the reason I ask that is for seasonal, the monthly trends are pretty helpful, but we have two totally different types of, for example, recreational spots where a lot of them just function on minor arterials during the week, and then they're busy on the weekends. And then others are just busy all week that are around national parks where people take long vacations. And so it would help to be able to see that, basically if we could graph the factors and what they're doing for the monthly day of the week instead of just the aggregates. And the same with the axles for the year. We know that, our axial factors change throughout the month, and then the monthly report that is in the report center is helpful, but it's still a little lacking because it doesn't show the monthly day of the week variation. And so would you ever consider building a report where you could visualize that a little bit?
So are you talking about the each type of a vehicle seasonal change? Because for Class 9 vehicle, in the winter may be low, in the summer may be high, and also for the Class 9 vehicle, over the weekend will be low, but during the weekday could be high. I think that will be part of our seasonal class factor analysis. That's one of the interface. The last interface we need to add to it is the seasonal class clustering analysis. So you can see that we don't have that right now.
We can compute
right.
seasonal class.
Yeah, we can compute the value.
And then after computing them, you can look at them and
Right.
graph them. There's reports for showing the seasonal class, but after computing it.
Okay.
Our mainframe, for the most part, never actually breaks.
I mean, TDA has issues, but it usually actually just, as long as you point it, it will always start up. Whereas whenever we don't have an internet connection, which sometimes happens at least once a month, then it doesn't work at all.
So Peter, I don't know if I answer your question or not. Do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I might follow up a little bit with you and see, just to, it kind of answers my question.
Right.
But it would be nice, you know, if you're looking at building factors by day of the week, it would be nice if you could see how the sites stack up to each other by day of the week too. And right now it's only by month. And
we do have a by day of week pattern.
Yeah, I think I would need to see an example of how you want the data laid out in a report, and then we can look at what it would take to develop such a report. It seems like we have all the numbers.
It would just be the factor numbers basically that are being averaged together. So I'm certain that you have them.
Yeah, I would need to see an example of which numbers in particular you mean. I'm struggling to visualize which day of week factors you're talking about.
Yeah, so if we can go back into here.
I'll put an example, BJ, and send it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I see at one time.
2013.
So I'm going to pick this example group in here, right? So we can see the factor, the monthly factor change by month, but you can also
you can't see it by monthly day of the week, and monthly day of the week is what's actually being applied to the counts.
So are you talking about this?
No, because that's for the whole year, right?
Yeah.
And we know that we don't have the same weekly pattern throughout the whole year.
See that for each month.
So I want to see the monthly day of the week for each individual month, especially the months where we're collecting traffic.
Okay.
12 of those.
Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, so that means we have to show like a 12 graph like this then, right?
Right, or if it came from the report center, I just want to see it somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the potential enhancement is maybe we can make a month drop down in here. So I can click on June, then it will show this graph about June, or if I click on August, then it will show the August. Wouldn't that be sufficient?
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm glad that we understand your needs, and that way we can, like I said, it should be pretty easy for us to add a month drop down in here, so that way you can go through each month and see how the day of week change.
Right, that would be great.
Yep, great. So yeah, we will capture this as our action item, so we'll add an enhancement.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Yep. Any other questions?
Because we've got enough.
Hi, Ben. This is Laura again. I had a question about the process all function on each of the clustering interfaces. Is it possible to manually process, say, you have a few groups you want to look at in great detail, like say we use a combination of groups that are permanent sites, multiple permanent sites, but then we also use individual stations for class, like just regular 24-hour or 48-hour counts. So could we, for example, analyze all of our more complicated groups that feature more stations individually, and then go to the process all page to process the remainder of, or whatever remaining stations we have that are short-term sites?
Yeah, what you would want to do is do that in the reverse, actually. Do a process all first, then go back and redo the ones that you want to take a closer look at.
Okay. Oh. And then you said you could reprocess, so we could process everything.
Right.
And then we could make edits to the analysis statuses or groups, and then reprocess everything if we wanted to.
Right. Basically, you refine certain groups. You process all groups, and you come back and do the cluster analysis and refine a few groups you desire.
Okay.
Do like iterative.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good.
Just 8 factors.
Any other questions?
January,
Chat.
Hi, Ben. One more question from TechDot. We were wondering if y'all said that you were going to be able to send the presentation out. I saw your recording, but I'm not sure I caught the part about sending the presentation.
Yeah, we will send out the video, the recorded video. Yeah.
Oh, what about we were hoping to get a copy of the PowerPoint that you
Yeah.
referenced earlier.
Yeah,
Okay,
I will
great.
do that too. Yeah, I will add the
Great.
PowerPoint and the video. Most likely we can put on the Zendesk, like I show you the Zendesk
Yeah.
page, so all the users have access to it.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
they kind of how they do it, but the estimation, this is it for estimation.
Anybody else? Any questions?
And if we go a little further than that, trying to figure something out sometimes.
Yeah, I hope the interface is pretty easy for everybody. So when you are using this interface, if you have any suggestions or feedback for us, let us know. Like Peter does suggest us to add that month drop down. So I think that's great feedback. So while you are using this interface, feel free to give us any feedback so that way we can keep improving this clustering analysis interface. So hope it will make your life easier. So any more questions? If nothing else, thank you very much. And like I mentioned, feel free to reach out to us if you need any help from us.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Two-thirds of the report.
Yeah, well,